3 years, I've been teaching 8th graders. So if you want to question my sanity, you're welcome to do that. But I'm going to ask my fellow judges to also introduce themselves, and then we will take care of a few nuts and bolts and begin. It's great to see you all, you guys.
Hello, everyone. My name's Teena Gabrielson. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Wyoming here in Laramie, Wyoming. I teach primarily political philosophy, and I've served as a state judge a couple times. This is my first time at the national level, and it's been great fun so far. So I'm looking forward to another fun day.
Greetings, my name is Barry Anderson. I'm an associate justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. I'm the senior justice on the court. That and a couple of bucks will buy you coffee well, $5 will buy you coffee somewhere. It just means I've been around a long time. I've had some experience with this program because for many years I was an assistant coach on a team from Hutchinson, Minnesota that managed to find its way to the national competition on a couple of occasions. And since then, I've had the privilege of judging at the national competition on several occasions. I just want to say on behalf of my colleagues, getting everything ready and participating in this electronic format. It's not how we anticipated the world to be, but sometimes it goes in directions we don't like or don't appreciate or certainly didn't expect. Churchill once said in one of his World War II speeches that difficulties mastered are opportunities won. We're going to have some bumps along the way probably, but we're going to master those difficulties and we're going to win those opportunities. And today, winning those opportunities is an opportunity to hear about Unit 1 and Question 3. You've already introduced yourselves, so I think someone has some other agenda items we need to deal with. We'll move right to the question. So the question. Oops, we got a little feedback there. John, can you deal with it?
Well, that usually happens, excuse me, if it's on another computer in the same room.
Yeah, and it could just be I don't know, a bad internet connection at the moment. I suppose we should just keep going.
Yeah.
Well, I will read the question. Maybe by the end of the question, this will all resolve itself. So, question 3. Aristotle asserts in politics that it is not the form of government, ruled by the one, the few, or the many, that matters most, but rather the ends of government that are most important. Where in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution did the framers set forth the ends of government? How did the framers differ, if at all, about how the ends of government should be prioritized? And which of the ends of government set forth in the Declaration and Constitution appear to have the highest priority today? The panel is ready to begin. We are ready to listen. The floor is yours.
The protection of individual rights and security go together like peanut butter and jelly on the sandwich that is the general welfare. In order to create balance, the framers assigned each branch a different means towards achieving these. The executive branch was most concerned with the security of communities, whereas the judicial branch promotes fairness by protecting the rights of the minority. The legislature works with the other branches to achieve these two ends.
In regards to security, the founders established the goal of, quote, providing for the common defense, unquote. Because of the urgency of defense, it is most efficient for one person to hold this responsibility, the executive. While swearing into office, presidents promise to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, unquote, and they are given the tools to do so throughout Article 2, the title Commander-in-Chief, the power to make treaties, and the power to appoint officers. Furthermore, executive orders empower the executive to take actions, quote, of immediate and pressing importance, as emphasized in the Declaration.
While power given to the executive ensures security, the founders worried about it being overbearing. Therefore, the legislative branch was given the purpose of protecting the general populace because it resembles the rule of the many, thus, quote, deriving its powers from the consent of the governed, unquote, as suggested in the Declaration. Legislative supremacy enables Congress to share purposes of both the executive and judicial branches. The inherent purpose of lawmaking is to keep people safe, achieved in part by congressional war powers and approval for international treaties. Congress also shares the purpose of protecting citizens' rights with the judiciary, since the need for re-election motivates representatives to follow through on their promises.
However, according to Alexis de Tocqueville, governments checked by the people are more susceptible to tyranny of the majority. To prevent this, the framers entrusted upholding the rights of the minority to the judicial branch. Judicial review, as implied in Article 3, Section 2, allows this branch sufficient power to protect these rights. Furthermore, the existence of trial by jury and an adversarial system of justice better protect rights and prevent the sort of injustices included in the Declaration as faults of the British government.
The founders cared deeply about protection of rights, but had quite different opinions on how best to protect them. Anti-Federalists such as George Mason and Samuel Adams thought they needed to be explicitly listed in a Bill of Rights to prevent a strong government from infringing on citizens' rights. On the other hand, Federalists such as Madison and Hamilton were concerned that a specific list would exclude any rights not explicitly listed from protection, essentially becoming a parchment barrier. This was addressed with the inclusion of the Ninth Amendment.
Of the two factions, the Anti-Federalists prioritized the protection of individual rights over the security of communities. However, Federalists, especially Hamilton, were more likely to prioritize security and the protection of the common good. He firmly believed that having a strong, singular executive would be essential to, quote, the protection of the community against foreign attack and the steady administration of the laws, unquote, as stated in Federalist 70.
Although security is prioritized today by some Americans, as seen in recent immigration restrictions, we believe the protection of individual rights is held to be more important, which can be seen in the ongoing fight for abortion rights. Roe v. Wade ruled to protect the right of a woman to privacy, but some states like Alabama are using fetal heartbeat bills to protect an unborn child's right to life. Both sides of the debate seek to protect rights, showing America's value of individual rights.
The United States Constitution strives for harmony between protection of individual rights and security of communities. Representatives have the ability to effectively govern while still listening to the voices of their constituents. Finally, with the three separate branches striving toward varied aspects of the ends of government, security, and the upholding of rights, America continues to promote the general welfare to make the perfect sandwich. This concludes our statement, and we are ready for your questions.
So I found your reference to the consent of the governed from the Declaration of Independence to be interesting, and I want to pursue that for a moment. That phrase comes from a somewhat longer phrase that includes the following language: deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. What do you suppose Thomas Jefferson and his Committee on Drafting had in mind when they talked about government depriving their just powers? What was the point they were trying to make there?
I think they're meaning to say that they are using the power that they see fit, so not necessarily all power from the consent of the governed, because they were worried about a strong government infringing on rights. And so by saying the just power, I think they meant the power that is important for government to have.
They also wanted to oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, I think that the framers, in creating the phrase consent of the governed, were alluding to the social contract and also stating that power derives ultimately from the people. We can see this with philosophers shortly after the founding, such as Immanuel Kant, whose Rechtsstaat, which was based off of the US constitutional principles, emphasizes that the people are an equal power to the state. The framers deeply believed in the people, in ultimate power dwelling in the people.
That brings us to a follow-up question. How effectively have minority rights been protected in the last 230 years of the American constitutional system? Have we done well with that idea of protecting minority rights?
I think that the Supreme Court has done an adequate job with protecting minority rights. Their main goal is to make sure that the Constitution and laws are staying recent. And I think that they've done that throughout many cases, such as Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. Board, which help to better integrate communities.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I would disagree. I think that we definitely have room for improvement on the protection of minority rights. Plessy v. Ferguson was an example of when our Supreme Court has failed in the upholding of the separate but equal doctrine. We can also see this when the Executive Order 9066 was not overruled in the Supreme Court. These are times when our minority rights were not protected by the Supreme Court.
That raises another question for me I'd just like to address very briefly. Is there any such thing as community rights? We talked about individual rights, minority rights, but if we think about any individual group of people, Navajo or Jehovah's Witnesses or Presbyterians or anything, does a community like that have rights that are different from individual rights? I'll go ahead and take a stab at it.
Well, I definitely
sorry, go ahead, Grace.
Thank you. I definitely think that there are community rights, whether it just be the general population. So I think that with our current stay-at-home orders, I think these are protecting the general population's right to life rather than any particular individuals.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Folks, my question for you is, for the founders, one of the ends of a federal republic is to avoid the most common faction, that between the rich and the poor. How effective has the U.S. Constitution been in this regard?
I would say that the US Constitution has not been very effective, especially during times of crisis. We can see the divide between the classes even more. And James Madison was especially wary of this and wanted to make sure that everybody would be seen as an equal. However, especially right now in terms of coronavirus, we can see that it is disproportionately affecting African Americans compared to Caucasians. And that just furthers divides between communities.
I think that we can see further examples of the divide between the rich and the poor, even in the American Constitution itself, with how with how American citizens were originally only allowed to vote if they were 21 years or older. And this was indeed a rather classist move, because in 1776, plenty of poor people lacked birth certificates, so they would not have been able to prove what age they were in order to vote.
Let's talk a little bit about Aristotle. I'm wondering how Aristotle would have viewed the progressive reforms of, say, the last 75 years. The initiative, recall, and referendum in particular. How would Aristotle have seen those reforms? Would he have approved of them or disapproved of them? Why or why not?
Well, I think that Aristotle was all about finding moderation. And so I think that he may not have agreed with all the things that are happening within these 75 years, because we can see lots of radical ideas, both on the right and the left. And these are creating significant divides that I think Aristotle would have found problematic.
Give me some examples of that, if you could.
Of radical
ideas.
Left
or right? I'm just curious what you would see as these radical ideas. Are you saved by the bell?
You saved by the bell.
Oh darn.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation about some really important issues. I've really enjoyed it, and I know my colleagues have too. Couple of thoughts that I had as I was listening to your responses. I really appreciated the way you picked up on the just powers point that I made. We're very quick to talk about the consent of the governed, but the framers of the Declaration were pretty concerned about what powers the government really had, and they had only just powers. And those powers, you know, in fact, I think if we had enough time, and I'm sure we could have gotten there, we could have launched into a discussion about natural rights and that our rights precede the government. But I thought you picked up on that well, and I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Tandy?
This is a great conversation. I really loved the way you began with the perfect sandwich analogy. That hit just that was very nice. I tried to throw you off a little bit with a question about is there such a thing as community rights? And community rights are different from minority rights and different from the rights of the whole community, but I guess we might call them identity rights, because my identity as the various things I am and the various things you are, those communities have rights as such. And that's a tough question. It's a tough question to answer right now, particularly as just in one example, churches are saying we have an absolute right to meet together in large groups, no matter what may be good for society. And we might find that, is that just unwise, or is that something other than that? So I appreciate the conversation you had on that and the thoughts you put into it. So I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's so great to meet you guys.
Thank you very much.
I also thought you all did a really nice job. I appreciate in particular the careful organization of your presentation. I thought that it moved really effectively from one point to the other, and you were able to, sorry about the feedback, that you're able to both give depth in your answer while having this clearly organized response. I also thought you did a nice job in response to the questions that my colleagues have already raised. So it was a really nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.